How are we doing tonight?
Very well.
You know, when I was growing up, we would get together for Christmas and stuff on my mom's side of the family, and she had six sisters and one brother. So I have like 25 cousins on that side of the family, and we'd get together for Christmas and we'd run around the farm, but one of our favorite things was always when Uncle Jeff would tell us a story, and usually the story was Jack and the Beanstalk. And I know what you're saying, Jack and the Beanstalk, I know the story. But when Uncle Jeff told the story, instead of saying run, he would say boogity, 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 boogity. And there were things like chainsaws in the story. Jeff's from southern Missouri. So it was cool, It was a good story. In fact, a year ago, when we had our family reunion, Uncle Jeff got up and he told Jack and the Beanstalk. I want to tell you a story tonight, and it doesn't have chainsaws, sorry, but it does have a prostitute. So I'm trying to balance things here a little bit. We find this story in the book of Joshua, and if you want to ever read the story, it's in Joshua chapter 2 and 3 and 4, around in there. The story starts. The Israelites, God's chosen people, have come out of Egypt after being enslaved for 400 years. And because of some of the knuckle-headed things that were done, because some people doubted God and people didn't have faith in God, they ended up wandering the wilderness for 40 years. And so that 40 years is now passed, and God has said, we're ready to go. I'm ready to take you to the promised land. You are now ready to enter into the land that I have promised you, the land that you and your people, my people, will dwell in. So Joshua now, Moses has died, Joshua is now the leader of the people, and as any good leader will do, he wants to plan ahead. And so he sends a couple spies. All the Israelites are on one side of the Jordan River, and they need to cross into the promised land and cross the Jordan River. And the land is not just there. They have to take the land. There are enemies that have controlled this land for a long time. And the first thing that they're going to see when they do that is the city of Jericho. And so Joshua says, all right, he picks two guys and he says, I want you to go and spy. Look at the land around and specifically check out Jericho. Now he says, God has promised us this land, so I know that God has a plan, but we just want to make sure our ducks in a row. Now the city of Jericho, as I've read about it, the city of Jericho was a huge walled city. And archaeological evidence suggests that the wall was 30 feet tall. And so I measured in here, and the ceiling here is not even 30 feet. It's less than 30 feet. It's about 25 feet. So it's a big wall. And it was actually two walls, a double wall. The outer wall was probably about 6 feet thick. The inner wall was 12 to 15 feet thick. And then there was a space between the two. This is a well-fortified city. And God has promised the Israelites that they will take this city. And now on top of these walls, they would build houses. So there are houses on top of the wall. So this is a big deal. So the two spies enter the city. Lots of traffic coming in and out of the city. And for whatever reason, they choose one particular house to go to visit. And it was the house of Rahab. Probably an inn. So probably they decided on this place because there was lots of traffic. Hopefully they would blend in. They would hear lots of talk about just things that were going on, the local gossip and things, and they would get a good picture of this city and what they would need to do to take this city. Now, Rahab just so happened to be a prostitute. And as you read in the Bible, quite often when it says Rahab, it will say the prostitute Rahab or Rahab the prostitute. Almost like the writers wanted just to understand who Rahab really was. And so these two spies go to Rahab's house. And I don't know if they just stuck out so much, if their accent was so bad, or they looked so much different, or if they were just really bad spies. I don't know. But the king of Jericho very quickly, very soon knew that, hey, there are two Israelites here and they're spying. And so, being the king of the city, you want to eliminate threats, he sends his soldiers to the house of Rahab and says, turn them over. And it's at this point that Rahab makes a decision. And there's not a lot in here that tells us why Rahab at that point made this decision. But Rahab has decided to cast her lot with a group of people that she doesn't know really hardly anything about. A group of people that's on the other side of the river that is pretty threatening. But she decides that that's where she wants her allegiance to be. And so she tells the soldiers that, yeah, they were here, but they left. In fact, they didn't just leave my house. They left the city. They're gone. But if you hurry, you can probably catch them. But in reality, Rahab had told the men to go up to the roof of the house, and she had told them to cover themselves with flax, with grasses, and hide there. And yeah, she lied. And it's part of the story, and God makes it pretty clear in the Bible that lying is a sin. But I think probably the point, a couple things. Number one, she was at a point, she had grown up, she had lived in really a heathen city. And probably didn't know much better than to do whatever it took to preserve herself and the safety of her family. And then the other thing, her allegiance was toward a God that she really didn't know much about, but she wanted to know more. So the soldiers go searching outside of the city for the two spies, and meanwhile Rahab goes up to the two spies. And here's where I think it starts to get really good. She says to them, I know the Lord has given you this land. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror. They had heard about these Israelites. They had heard what had happened 40 years previous, how the Israelites had been taken out of Egypt by these different happenings, different things, the plagues. The water had been turned to blood. The land had been dark, pitch black for 3 days, covered with fleas, frogs covering everywhere. All of these things, and finally the final one, all the firstborn males had been struck down in one night in Egypt. And so finally the Pharaoh of Egypt had said, get out of here. But then he chased them down, and this is where the story of the Red Sea takes place, and God had separated the water so the Israelites could walk across the dry ground. The people in Jerusalem had heard about all of these things 40 years ago. And Rahab had decided, I want in on this. I don't really know anything about it, but I want in. I have to think that she was at a point in her life that, well, she was a prostitute. She didn't have much going on for her. She didn't have anything to look forward to. She was going to live this lifestyle and then die. And she wanted more. So she goes to these two spies. We're all afraid. We have heard all of these stories. We know what you guys have done. And then she says, no wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. And then she takes it to a point that goes beyond fear. She's not just afraid of the Israelites. She's not just afraid of what is going to happen to her city. Here's what she says. For the Lord your God is supreme, is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. She has recognized that it's not just the might and the power of the Israelite nation. They've got something else going for them. It's not just that they've got great leaders or they've got mighty soldiers. they've got something. And she recognized, and I don't know how she recognized it, but she seemed to recognize it very quickly. That even though she's living in a city where they probably worship many gods, probably in a very brutal fashion in some instances, maybe human sacrifices, she recognized that whatever the Israelites had, they also had the God, the supreme God. And so she really says to the guys, I'm going to make a deal with you. I saved you from capture. Now save me. And don't just save me, save my family. She wants her mother, her father, her brothers, her sisters, all their families with her. And so the spies said, okay, that works. She lets them down the wall. Remember, her house was on the wall. She lets them down out of an outside window, down a red rope, so that they can escape. She says, go into the hills and hide for 3 days, and then it'll be safe. You can go back to your camp. And so they do so, but before they left, they said, keep this rope hanging here. This will be the sign that your house will be safe. Whoever is in your house. But if you betray us, deal's off. If anybody leaves the house, we're not guaranteeing their safety. And so then the waiting thing begins. And I gotta wonder how you sit there and wait. And if Rahab was fearful, and she said the rest of the city was fearful, they know this huge camp is out there, and you're just waiting. The gates have been locked down to the city. And then one day, they see this thousands upon thousands soldiers approaching. And they don't attack. They just march around the city, not saying a word. They march around one time and they go back. And the next day it happens again. And the next day. And the next day. 6 days. By that time, you start out kind of freaking out a little bit at what's going on. And after the 6th day, you're probably standing on top of the wall yelling at them, saying, what are you doing? Throwing rotten tomatoes and stuff at them. And making fun of them because you think you're going to capture the city by marching around it. But on the 7th day, something different happens. Because after that first time, they don't stop. They do it again. And they do it again. And they march around 7 times. And then the priests blow their horns and the people shout. And this is where the Bible tells us that the walls just fell out. They crumbled, they fell flat, except for Rahab's. And so the Israelite soldiers took the city, they conquered the city, but they left Rahab and her family alone because they were safe in the house. A couple things that I really want to pull out of this. I think the first thing that gets me, and I guess I hadn't paid a lot of attention to it before this week as I was reading. But the idea of Rahab recognizing so quickly the might of God, the awesomeness of God, but not just that, the salvation that He offered. And she didn't just recognize it, she acted on it. She seized it. She said, I want this. And it was at great cost because any deal she was making, the moment she decided that instead of turning these spies over, my life is at stake here. I am now an enemy of my home, an enemy of my own people because I have betrayed them. And it was because she so quickly recognized who God was. And she decided she wanted that. I think sometimes, it's kind of like buying a car. We go and we look and we kick the tires and then we go home and think about it. And then we go to another place and we look and it's just such a big decision, and I really want to be locked into those payments for such a long time. And then finally we either do or we don't. And sometimes that's the way we treat our Christian walk, I think. We kind of go around kicking the tires and wonder, do I really want this? Or maybe I can just lease it, you know? That way I'm not totally locked into it, I'm just leasing it, and it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But Rahab went, boom, I want it now. That's our lesson from Rahab. Seize it. Don't wait. Seize it. You know, the really cool thing about Rahab the prostitute Rahab. If you go into the New Testament, in Hebrews chapter 12, this is sometimes referred to as the Faith Hall of Fame because it just goes through and lists a whole bunch of characters from the Old Testament and talking about how their faith carried them through, or what their faith in God enabled them to do. And in verse 31, it says this: "It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies." I don't know about you, but that seems like a big deal to me. Here we've taken a person who would seem to be pretty insignificant in the broad scheme of things, especially when you consider her station in life, her social standing. And she gets a mention with just a few people as being a big deal. And I just got to think that it's because she so readily threw herself into God. She so quickly said, I want that. The last thing that I want us to take out of this is this. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've been, what kind of life you've led. It doesn't matter. God took a prostitute here. God took a prostitute and made her into something she never dreamed that she would be. Because here's what history tells us. Rahab and her family, after Jericho fell, they went and lived with the Israelites. And in fact, Rahab married an Israelite, and some people would speculate that she married one of the spies. And they had kids, as people will do. Her grandson was a pretty famous guy, David, King David. He wrote a lot of the Psalms, most of the Psalms. And when you go into chapter 1 of Matthew, and you start to read the lineage of Jesus, who begat who, and finally we get Jesus, guess whose name we find there? Rahab. Rahab the prostitute is in the family line of Jesus. Maybe you're at a point where you think, I've done it. I'm in it too deep. I can't get out of it. Or you might be thinking, God has no place for me. Look at my life. Look at what I've done. I'm a mess. God doesn't want any part of this. I think we need to look at Rahab when we start to have those thoughts. Number one, God's waiting. Seize it. Recognize that He is the creator of the universe. But recognize that He is your salvation. And then we look at Rahab and we see, look at what life she led. Look at where she was. And look at what she became. There is not a single person in here that God can't take that same kind of person and do what he did with Rahab. But we have to take that step. We have to recognize it, and we have to seize it. We have to do it. God's waiting. And don't wait. Don't wait for a couple of reasons. We don't know what the future holds. And number two, why stay in the position you're at right now? Why not take what God has to offer now instead of waiting? Find the peace that only he can offer. Find the salvation that only he can offer. Don't wait.
My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood.